have to admit, I feel a little bit like a seminarian preaching my first sermon in front of a congregation. Because over the summer I experienced so much and did so much that I feel like I want to include everything right in this one message to you. But we'll do two things. I'll tell you a bit about the trip, and then we'll talk a little bit about the text. I started out in the summer visiting Weston Priory up in Vermont, and it was a really good beginning to ground me, because as I said to the children, I didn't have much left in terms of thought capacity or energy. And there was a lot of reasons for that, having sold the house last fall or this winter, and just doing a lot of work and trying to not be a yo-yo going back and forth between the realtor and here. So it was a bit of a challenge, but one of the things that I began while I was there was to practice a sense of mindfulness. Now, you would think mindfulness shouldn't be that difficult. We usually pay attention to what we're doing. But mindfulness is simply living in the moment so that you're not anticipating the doctor's appointment, the next turn on the road. You can simply be and be aware. Now, I've attempted this. You would think a minister should be able to do this after 20 years in ministry. But, and I don't think to most people like an anxious person. But I tend to stay awake at night and worry about things and think about possible outcomes, usually the worst possible outcomes, and that, of course, ramps up the anxiety. And so that day, those 2 days in Vermont, helped me begin a sense of mindfulness, and it allows me to see what's around me, to listen when someone's speaking. And it's been a much more joyful way of being, and it boded very well for me, especially when there were a couple of times where I came this close to not making a couple of flights, including my first one home. It was really tight in terms of not my fault, but airline things. So I began in Vermont. I reconnected with a lot of friends, and then I headed to Scotland, and that's where I realized I really, really was tired, because I had missed booking a connecting flight from Glasgow to Heathrow, because I was flying from Heathrow to France to see where my family had come from. So thank God I was staying with someone who did have the wherewithal to help keep me on track, and I got my flight to France and everything. But the one thing about Scotland is it's really hard to get there or get around, because the whole west coast is riddled with lochs and rivers. And so to go from Glasgow to Oban to take my first trip to get out to Iona was a 5-hour train ride, and then a ferry, and then a bus ride that was a big coach bus driving on these wee roads. It was a little scary, and then a tiny ferry to the island of Iona, and then a 20-minute walk to the Abbey. So that was like an 8-hour trip just to get to the Abbey, and that's just tiring in itself. But it was a good place to be for the week, and I made a lot of connections there, met pastors from the US and people from the UK, and that the main purpose of that trip was to be part of the program, which I learned a lot from, which we will certainly unpack and share as time goes on. But one of the things I'll share a little bit later about the learning from that. I returned back and went to the Isle of Skye, where I spent time with Reverend Katrina Grant's parents. She's the pastor in Ledyard, and originally from Glasgow. So that was wonderful, because I'd met them before, been with them before, and I got to see some wonderful places and some wonderful things I hadn't seen, including going to the Clan Donald Museum. And those of you who know Jim Donald and Irene, there was a portrait on the wall in the museum of this, 17th, 18th century, 1746 portrait of a man, And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, it looks like Jim Donald. And so I took a picture of that portrait and showed him, and he said, oh my God, he got all choked up. He said, this looks like my grandfather. So that was really kind of a neat thing to be thinking of him, and as I thought of many of you of this congregation while I was away. And then I went, my last few days in Scotland, I went down to the island of Islay, which is spelled I-S-L-A-Y. And yes, so many names in Scotland, you don't say them the way they're written. I found that out the hard way. But, and that's where there's like 8 Scotch distilleries, and but just to go and experience and see how they make Scotch, and just to talk with the people, it was just a really great experience. And I spent the last few days in Glasgow, last 2 days, and saw my friend Melinda, who was my best friend's sister, who's lived in the UK for many years, and her daughter, who also lives over there. And then I saw her daughter's ex-partner the next day, where I went to a friend's meeting up in Glasgow, and then I flew home. So, and then the last few weeks, I've been just reconnecting with people, which was, but I realized halfway through the Scotland trip that I was back, that I had my brain, that I had my sense of humor, that I actually had the energy to joke around with people, and which I do anyway, but it was nice to know I could have a witty comeback occasionally, and you know, just to feel like I was all together. And so when I came home, I got to see people I hadn't seen in years, some with some health issues that are really difficult. And in leaving those people, I got very sad, and it made me realize that I do care deeply about people. But sometimes it's so strong I have to shut it off. So that's a good knowledge for all of you to know that, yeah, I care very deeply for all of you. But sometimes I have to kind of hold back because it can be overwhelming. But it's also a good learning for me to just allow myself to feel. And perhaps that will make my, a new way of being in terms of relating to folks, because I can get really involved, and then it wears me out. So that's a good learning experience for me. And one of the unexpected joys of my last couple of weeks was a trip to Baxter State Park up in Maine, where I did not expect I would be. Back in June, I would not have been able to hike the mountains in Maine. And I hiked a part of a day and survived, and I was just, I wasn't quite jumping for joy because my knees were killing me at the end of it, but I was just very excited, and I realized how much I missed hiking and being out there in the wilderness, and stayed with some people on this tiny island right in Baxter State Park overnight, and came home and came back to church. So first thing of order is to get a new pair of hiking boots, this time from LL Bean, because if they get destroyed, they'll get replaced by LL Bean, not the boots that I had. But, so now to the text, where Paul says each of us, that just as each of us has one body with many members, and we don't all have the same function, in Christ we form one body, and we belong to each other, and we all have different gifts. Paul says that we have gifts that we are to use. And those are the gifts that we celebrated with our teachers today. But as I look around and I think of all the members of this church, I think that we have a lot of untapped potential. And that's an important thing for all of us to remember as we go forward from this day. Because this is a vital congregation. And I've heard numerous times before I left, and even though I've been back for a week, I've heard it, if we just had more people to do the work. And I think that expression, that need, comes from a mindset that we have to keep doing everything that we've been doing in our recent memory. So here are a few of the things I've learned during the program at Iona that may help us look at this in a different way. One, that without change, in our lives and our work, we are essentially dead. 2, the church was intentionally designed to be small. Not our church, but the church, the community that Jesus envisioned, was intended to be small so we could know each other and then we could work together. 3rd, in order to thrive, we need to believe that there are unlimited resources available to us. This means that we can always find a way to meet our needs, whether it's our personal needs or the needs of the congregation or the wider community. And 4th, the good news of Jesus is meant to change our lives. And so when we've heard the good news, and every time we hear it, we have to ask ourselves, how may this gospel change my life? We all have gifts, and many of them not yet realized. And this church, our church, has a gift yet unrealized to share. Maybe it's something to share with the community and perhaps even the world. The truth is, we have work to do, and it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take all of our time. It will require us to take stock of all we do, for we are very busy. And busyness does not always mean faithfulness. Our faith, our lives in relation with our Creator is sacred business. We are called to do holy work, and that work should be done in hope and in joy and in love. Will you pray with me? Holy One, help us all confront what makes for death and despair in our lives, in our community, and in our world. May we never lose sight of the possibility of transformation, and may we be continuously surprised by the people who believe in each other, who believe in us. Amen.